The name's Fox, Peter Fox, and this is Castle Donington. Yes, you're probably right. I probably watch far too much James Bond for my own good. Have you ever watched people in cinemas? The things we watch, the things we see, they kind of change the way we do things. You know, if you're watching people coming out of cinema after a Western, for instance, you know, a cowboy movie, you'll see them, the men are all kind of walking, you know, with a kind of bow-legged swagger, as if they just got off a horse. And the women are bow-legged as well. Or if they've been at a war film, you know, they've been to a war film, they'll come out all eagle-eyed and alert, as if they're expecting an enemy attack from behind the refreshment counter. You know, we get changed by the stories we see. We all like a good story, don't we? So, are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. There was this aeroplane travelling across America, domestic flight, and it stopped on the way to refuel, as they do. And the passengers were all told that they could go over to the terminus and have a cup of coffee, stretch their legs. Well, some of them went over there and they sat by the window, and it happened as they looked out of the window, they saw something that made them rearrange their travel arrangements immediately. They saw the pilot, big dark glasses on, and walking with a guide dog. Now, they knew it was a guide dog, he had one of those harnessy kind of things on. It's not surprising, perhaps, that a lot of them decided to change their tickets, their on-flight tickets, immediately. 50% of the passengers did not proceed with the journey. Well, you would have been the same, wouldn't you, if you'd seen the pilot of your plane walking his guide dog? It just goes to show how easily you can get things mixed up if you only get half the story, if you only see part of the picture. Because they're quite right, it was a guide dog for the blind. It belonged to one of the passengers. She decided when they all went over to the terminus that she was going to stay where she was in her seat. It just seemed easier for her that way. And it happened that the pilot, who was a kind man, was walking back through the cabin, saw her, and he said, you know, was she all right? Was there anything you can do to help her? And she said, oh, I'm fine. She said, I'm just a bit worried about my dog. You couldn't just give him a quick walk round, could you, outside? He needs a bit of a walk. So the pilot very kindly said, yeah, sure. He came outside the plane with the guide dog, the lady's guide dog. It was a bright sunny day, so he put his sunglasses on and gave the lady's dog a walk, and in the process lost 50% of his passengers. See, if you only see half the picture, you don't always know what's going on. The fact of the matter is, we do this all the time because all of us, in our own way, are the heroes of our own stories. I mean, we all have our story, the story of our life. And you know, we are the narrator, and we are also the central character, the hero. It's easy to forget that you're not the only one with a story. All the other people around you, they all have their story too, and you're only a small player in the story of their life. I mean, when you tell a story about something you've done, haven't you noticed how you always end up being the hero, the way you tell it? You know how you have that feeling sometimes when you've had a bit of a discussion, or even an argument, let's say, with someone. You know how you walk away and you think to yourself, I know what I should have said. I should have said this. By the time you tell the story to someone else, guess what? You did say this. You always manage, when you're retelling stories of experiences in your own life, to make yourself look better. You know, you always come off better than perhaps in real life you did. I mean, for instance, you know, a woman buys a pair of socks and she was a bit surprised by the price. So she's telling the story to her friend later. She said, so I said to him, what? She said, you're charging that much just for this pair of socks? I think you ought to give me a bit of a discount. And he said, oh, I'm very sorry, he said. I didn't realise they were so. I said, well, you didn't realise how expensive they were. I think the least you can do it. I mean, you must be able to give me something a bit cheaper than that. And he said, well, perhaps I could give you 50p as a discount. I said, I should jolly well think so. So here are the socks. They're not bad, are they? Now, what actually happened? might not have been quite like that. Perhaps what really happened, the real conversation, went more like this. Excuse me, these socks are lovely, but have you got anything a bit cheaper? So he says, oh, yeah, well, I'll tell you what, love, I'll give you 50p off. Oh, thank you very much. You see, the story changes because we're all the heroes of our own story. But so is everyone else. The same thing is true for all of us. And as you look around you and you look at other people, they too have their story. In fact, as my wife has often said to me, it's not only about you. The problem is, when we look at other people's stories, we really only see a very small part of who they are and what they've done. And that sometimes means we draw some, well, pretty inaccurate conclusions. I got to listen to a lot of stories when I was working as a priest and then as a bishop. You have access to some amazing stories. People let you share a little piece of their lives. And sometimes the stories you hear are staggering. I've never been too surprised when I find out how sinful people can be, but I'm always so delighted and so amazed when I see how brave they can be, sometimes facing a terrible bereavement, or they face perhaps terminal illness for themselves or for people they love. When I hear the story of how someone copes with a disability, perhaps they're blind or deaf, or perhaps they've suffered some disfigurement or some other kind of disability, in the way that they have managed, despite those challenges, to come out courageous. The people that really, really amaze me are the people who have come out of abusive situations of one sort or another, some sort of domestic abuse, and the courage with which they dealt with it day by day. Sometimes it's just wonderful when you really hear someone's true story. The problem is that we don't always hear the full story. It's very easy to see somebody and completely misjudge them. There might be somebody that we find it difficult to get along with. It can be somebody in your family or someone at your work, and however you try, you just don't seem to be able to hit it off. You just don't get along. It's like you're in parallel universes somehow. But if you knew a little bit more about their story, perhaps you'd have a bit more respect for them, a bit more sympathy, a bit more understanding. I mean, just because it's been difficult for you to know and to like that person, well, you don't know the whole story, do you? And perhaps if you did, things would be different. Perhaps if they knew more about you, they wouldn't be so quick to rush to judgment. It's a funny thing, this business of the stories we tell. But by and large, the better you understand somebody, the easier it is to forgive them. That's the way it really works. I used to find very often I'd deal with people who perhaps found it very, very difficult to express love. But expressing love isn't something that comes automatically. It's a thing we learn. We learn to show and express love because we've been shown how to do it by the people who love us. Sometimes someone who would love to be able to embrace their children perhaps just feels incapable of doing it because they never learned, they were never embraced, they were never cuddled themselves. And so they become difficult people to get close to. But if we know their story and the story of their life, that person might be a hero. You just never know, hearing part of the story. What we have to remember is our story is not the only one. Other people have a story too. There was a marvellous Australian horseman. He was really well remembered as a horse. He started off as a Brit, but he went out to Australia and settled there. And he was not only a famous horse rider, he was also a bit of a poet in that kind of Australian way. And he had something to say about this, which I found incredibly simple, but very, very helpful. He said, "Life is mainly froth and bubble. Two things stand like stone. Kindness in another's trouble. Courage in your own." So go on writing your story and make it a good one. God bless.